I'm so pleased to have you here. I'm Tammy Heiss. I teach American Religious History at UW, and it is my very great pleasure to have this panel here. It is inspired by the new documentary by Margot Guernsey, The Philadelphia 11, and so I hope that these women will share some of their stories and experiences that relate to Philadelphia 11 and go far beyond it to talk about the issues of our time. And before I forget or am remiss in any way, I want to acknowledge the generous support of my own Department of Religious Studies and Philosophy, the Wyoming Institute for Humanities Research, the UW Libraries for their support for this programming today, and especially Alan Doyle with Canterbury Fellowship. Helping to organize this panel. Thank you all so much. I'll turn it over to the Reverend Canon Bobby Fitzhugh as moderator for today.
Thank you, and I'll just stand up for a minute to make some introductions. I think in looking at the room, many of you are Episcopalians, and I don't want to call out any of you who may not be, but we want to make sure that you understand the context of what the Episcopal Church is. So there may be some quizzes for those of you who think you know what the Episcopal Church means. As Tammy said, I'm the Reverend Canon Bobby Fitzhugh. A canon in the Episcopal Church is a big gun. Or someone who is on staff and reports to the bishop. In a diocese. So that's that piece of it. I am a priest in the Episcopal Church in Wyoming, and I was ordained in 2014. I currently serve churches in Carbon County, and I'm on staff, so I travel the diocese. So I say I belong to the Church of St. Subaru. So, I'm going to moderate this panel today, and I want you to hear the stories of these remarkable women that we have with us. So I'll introduce each of you just by name, and then if you would talk a little bit more about your journey and your call to the priesthood, and then we'll provide some additional background about what we're all doing as it relates to this documentary. Can everybody hear us if we just sit here and talk? Okay, cool. So just first of all, are there any of you who really don't know what the Episcopal Church is? Any hands if you're not sure what the Episcopal Church is or means? Because then if so, we can skip some of that.
Skip the quiz.
The quiz part, yes. But just to remind all of you who are here, the Episcopal, what does the word Episcopal mean? Alan?
The bishop.
Right.
Yeah.
Episcopal is the Greek word, comes from the Greek word for episkopos, which is the Greek word for bishop. So we descend and come from and respond liturgically to bishops in our structure. The Episcopal Church is not the Episcopal Church of the United States. We are a church of the world. The Episcopal Church was created and formed after the American Revolution. We were originally part of the Church of England, and after we quit playing after that Boston Tea Party, and we quit kind of playing nice with our brethren across the pond, the Episcopal Church was formed. We are still part of the Anglican Communion, which is the greater Episcopal Church. But we are a church. I actually picked this up, Catherine, just to make sure we remember this. We are in 22 nations and territories, including the Caribbean, Central South America, Europe. Navajo land is its own nation. So we are very much an international church. And in fact, our legal name is the Domestic and Foreign Missionary Society of the United States, which is where we are incorporated.
Well, actually, no, it's just the Domestic and Foreign Missionary Society. Yeah. It's without any national tags.
So anyway, we are blessed to have with us a bishop who wears purple shirts. That's the distinction of of bishops in the Episcopal Church. Our bishops are clad in purple. We color code our bishops. So anyway, we are blessed to have with us Bishop Katharine Jefferts Schori, who is actually was the first woman presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church. And so she'll talk to you a little bit about what that means. She served in that role. And she's currently the assisting bishop for the Episcopal Church in Wyoming, which is our statewide diocesan level. And then the Very Reverend Marilyn Engstrom, who many of you know. Marilyn is the Dean Emerita, meaning she's seasoned. Of St. Matthew's Episcopal Cathedral in Laramie. And a cathedral is typically where the bishop's seat is, where the bishop is in a Episcopal diocese. But in Wyoming, we like to do things differently. So we moved our actual offices of the Episcopal Church up to Casper for geographical reasons a number of years ago. But the cathedral is still the place where the bishop celebrates every Easter. And every one of our churches has a bishop's seat, so the bishop always has a chair reserved for him or her in our places. Very uncomfortable, yes. And then we have the Reverend Roxanne Friday on the end here. Roxanne is the Indigenous minister for the Episcopal Church. She's the priest in charge, which is a word we use for a priest who's in charge of a parish, at St. David's Shoshone Episcopal Mission and our Father's House in Ethete. So Roxanne serves both the Northern Arapaho and Eastern Shoshone tribes on the reservation, and she will tell you her story as well. And then we have the Reverend Bernadine Craft, who is a priest at Holy Communion Episcopal Church in Rock Springs. And then the Reverend Melinda Bobo to my left, who is still momentarily the rector at St. Andrews in the Pines Episcopal Church in Pinedale, and again, a very active member of this particular diocese. So I guess just to start, and we're just going to throw some questions out, and then we want you to ask whatever questions you might have of any of this panel. But just, Marilyn, let's start with you. And if you want to just talk about your journey and when you when and how you were called to the priesthood, and then kind of what that journey has looked like for you.
Sure. I went to school at the University of Wyoming and had a career here for 12 years as the Associate Director of Admissions. And even though I won the award for the Outstanding Staff Member, I did not get invited to interview for a job to be promoted. And I believed at that time that there was, that Jesus had a plan for my life and I should be faithful to ask for that. And so I basically said, okay, God, you have Lent, I will fast and pray, and I'd like to have you reveal what my next step should be. And I truthfully thought I would be either going into counseling or get an MBA. And during the course of that, at a 24-hour prayer vigil with some other friends, someone came in and said, you know, I don't know what you gals have been doing here since 5 o'clock last night, but I've been having images of Marilyn being ordained as a priest. I wanted to run out of that room about as fast as I could because I was very involved in lots of lay ministries, both at the cathedral and within the diocese, and I thought, impossible. But what if God is speaking through this whack job? And I went to the dean of the cathedral, I went to our bishop, and they said, well, we've been kind of wondering when you would figure it out. But the dean said women should not be ordained. And he started through this whole thing about why not. And then he kind of shook himself. He goes, but if someone's being called to that, I think it's you. And so within 2 weeks, I had visited a seminary, and by the next year, I had resigned from my job at the university and was on my way to seminary. I was in Pittsburgh for 3 years going to seminary, and then I came back to Wyoming, where I was ordained first as a deacon at the cathedral. That was in June of '89, And then I was ordained as a priest at St. George's Lusk in December of that year. So I've been a priest just short of 35 years. And I've served the church in Lusk. I've served the church in Gillette. I was the diocesan coordinator of college and youth work. And then I finished up as the dean of the cathedral. And I've been retired about 10 years.
Melinda.
So I have been a priest for almost 23 years. I was ordained priest in December of 2001, or as my seminary class liked to say, class of '01. But I kind of got started down this road when I was in graduate school at Purdue, and I was working on my master's degree, and they had all of the graduate students taught the entry-level courses. So English 101, English 102, English 103, 201, etc. So I'd been teaching, and it was probably about a year in or so, and I thought, okay, so the only job skill I'm going to have coming out of this is as a teacher, and I don't think that's what I want to be. And I'd been very active. I was there as an undergraduate as well, so I'd been active in the campus ministry, which was Church of the Good Shepherd, for then, by that point, 4 years, and went to my priest, because that's what you do when you have this major life crisis. And he was this darling, looked like a demented Santa Claus is what we called him, Father Klatt, and he was just the most wonderful guy, sarcastic, smart, loving. And I said, so here I am, you know, I'm looking at next year graduating with this master's in English, and the only thing I don't want to write. I like teaching, but I can't see myself doing this for the rest of my life. So what do you think I should do? And he said, okay, I want you to think about becoming a priest. Don't say anything right now. I want you to go think about it and come back and talk to me another time. So, and I felt like I just ran myself headfirst into a brick wall and my brain had exploded, and kind of staggered out of his office and thought about it. And it was just like, ah! And at the same time, it was actually felt like having a light bulb go off of, like 67 megawatts, and just going, and I thought about it for about 2 days, and I went back to his office and I said, okay, I've thought about it. Yes. He said, good, let's get this party started. So we went through the process. They had just changed how it was done. So it used to be that bishops actually selected the candidates for a priest, and basically priests and bishops would collaborate on who was going to be the next in the club. And what they had decided at General Convention, the previous General Convention, was that they were going to revamp this entire process so that congregations and diocesan leadership also had input into the process. So this was going to be the first year that the Diocese of Indianapolis did this, and got to the mandatory interview with the Commission on Ministry and the Standing Committee, and they said no. They said, it's very clear to us that you have a call to priesthood. However, we feel there are 3 issues. So you're too young, you need to wait until you have a career and retire, because priests don't make that much money. And so if you have your retirement to live on, as well as the priest salary, you'll be fine financially. Second, what we're hearing in this interview is you really aren't in touch with the Black experience because you've never lived in the ghetto. So we think you need to go have a ghetto experience. And third, there are too many women being ordained, and we don't want the priesthood to turn into a pink-collar ghetto.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so at that point, I kind of went, thank you, yes, thank you very much, tucked my tail between my legs, went back to my congregation and they said, no, And so we're done here. And 12 years later, I'm in Wyoming, and at the University of Wyoming, working on an elementary ed degree and attending at the cathedral and taking education for ministry. And first semester, it's a 4-year course, first semester my group looks at me and says, "We think you have a call to priesthood." And I said, no, been down that road, not doing it again, thank you very much. No. So for 3 years, they nagged me, nonstop. And finally, during the 4th year, I said, okay, I'm sick of hearing this. If you really want me to do this, I will do this. And when they tell me no again, you get to pick up the pieces because I will be shattered. And they said, sounds good to us. So, so we started the process. I'd been serving as a lay minister both in the cathedral and at St. Luke's Medicine Bow, and decided that, St. Luke's Medicine Bow would probably not have that many opportunities of sending someone, supporting someone, although my sponsoring priest, Todd Sermon, was also sponsored by Medicine Bow, and Arlen Rounds, who was also, after me, came through the process. So actually, they were really good at producing priests. So went through this whole process. We started in mid-November. The date for the standing committee meeting was, the interview meeting was like the 1st of February. And we got, or beginning of January actually, because in 6 weeks we got everything done. So all the paperwork, all the tests, all the psych exams, all the physicals, all the everything. So went to the interview and, told them, okay, here's who I am, here's what I'm doing, and I'm not changing any of this when I get ordained. For one thing, I was a Middle Eastern dancer, and I said, love it, not quitting. And they said, we think it would be really cool to have you ordained and a belly dancer. So I'm like, wasn't expecting that. So anyway, they said yes, the bishop said yes. So, and then here I went. Everything went just like clockwork. So went to seminary, had this fabulous experience, was ordained a deacon in June of 2001 after graduation. December of 2001 was ordained a priest, was in Minnesota for 3 years in a parish called St. Martin's by the Lake on Minnetonka Lake, Lake Minnetonka, and then served about 16 months in Craig, Colorado, came back to Wyoming, and started doing supply work and ended up as a ministry developer for the diocese, serving 5 congregations, and then ended up called to be rector of St. Thomas Du Bois and then St. Andrew's in the Pines in Pinedale.
A couple things that Melinda touched on is this whole discernment process. So, and where you come from. People can go to seminary, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a priest, because that requires sort of a conversation with God, as Marilyn alluded to, and discernment from a congregation, from a diocese, and approval at a lot of different levels, from the congregation, from the standing committee, from the bishop, and it is not this is what I want to do thing. Another thing that has been alluded to is seminary, and Melinda and Marilyn and Catherine and a piece of Bernadine went to a seminary, went away to seminary. About 10 years ago now, we in the Episcopal Church in Wyoming were blessed to be introduced to the Iona Collaborative, which is a seminary training in place. So we have trained, and I counted it up yesterday, we have well, 60% of the current clergy serving in the Episcopal Church in Wyoming came from Iona. So without the Iona Collaborative, we would not have increase.
60% of our clergy.
60% of our clergy. 60% of our clergy are also women. 60% of our active clergy are women. In the greater Episcopal Church, that number is 40%. So we're actually ahead of that curve a bit. But the Iona Collaborative allowed churches to raise up what started out as a locally raised priest coming from that church, with the intent that once that person went to Iona for this 3-year period, spending a weekend a month in Casper with colleagues, using the Seminary of the Southwest in Austin as our parent seminary. That's where the instructors come from. I was in class 2, Bernadine was in class 1, and yet I think a dozen, you were in class, Melinda was a mentor. About a dozen people, I was in a class of a dozen.
About 7.
Similar. Now it's 3 or 4 because we've ordained a lot of people. But in any event, it's a way to allow people to be ordained while still continuing to work and not have to decide, I need to quit this job and go to seminary. I'm going to be able to do this multitasking, as it were. So anyway, that's just a little bit more background on that. And, Roxanne, why don't you talk about your call story, and I'll come back to the middle here.
Yeah. I started out my life going to church in my grandpa's church in New York. The beginning of my life, moved to Wyoming, and really wasn't involved in any church up until I married my husband Aaron, whose family was very involved with our Father's house in Ethete, and so that became my church as time went on. And I found this Bible. I kind of want to go back a little bit before I met Aaron. I found this Bible at a yard sale. And I thought, I'm going to just go ahead and get this Bible. And that has been with me for ever since. I mean, I was talking almost 40 years I've had this red letter King James Version. Yes, and so...
We're just guessing.
So, it kind of helped me in the beginning of this process that I never thought I would ever be on. I never thought I would be a priest in my life. And, but I was always this person to my family, being I'm the oldest child, so I was always helping my siblings with their problems and taking just a leadership role in everything I did. And something tragic happened to our family that caused me to really take a look at my own spirituality and, really do some praying what was happening in our lives. And I saw these prayers being answered. It was just like a miracle was happening in front of my eyes. And so, after we came out of this storm in our life, and I attributed everything good because of prayer, I just was speaking about it all the time. You guys need to pray because your prayers are answered, and just an advocate for going further in your lives with what you want to believe in, And I grew up with traditional culture, the peyote meetings, the sweat lodge, where we did prayers in there too all the time. And so we were like really prayerful in our lives. It just wasn't sitting in the pews in church all the time, But I did occasionally, Easter, Christmas, during those times, go to our Father's house and join with everybody. That's when the biggest groups would come in. But the path to become ordained for me was when I started to notice, after this miracle that happened in my life and to our family's life, where I just started to see things opening up, just like what Melinda said. The doors just opened and it was so easy to go down this path. And so I took that as a sign that, somebody's trying to work through me on this. And, and then just kind of kept going from there. And pretty soon I was like, well, I'm going to become a priest. Am I really ready for this? Am I ready to become a priest, especially on the reservation? And after a while, I just, meeting, I call my brothers and sisters in Christ in Iona School because we all got very close. And I felt this family of people And it just became more easier for me to say, yes, I want to do this. I want to bring this feeling I get down here in Casper, Iona School, take it home with me and share this with everybody. Shoshones, Arapahoes, it didn't matter who it was in the church. And so becoming ordained and I became the first Native American woman to become ordained in the state of Wyoming. There was 2 other people, Native people, they were men. And one of them was my brother-in-law, just like a year or so before I became ordained. But he had been trying for like 11 years in his journey to become ordained. And for me, it was like, I'm ready. And so I became ordained in May of 2016, or June of 2016, and then ordained as a priest in May of 2017. So it's been 8 years, like 8 years since I became first ordained. And it's hard to believe because that didn't seem like it was that long ago, you know, because of the ministry itself. It took over my life, for one thing. I really can't plan, you know, something. I just have to go with, well, if I don't get called, you have to understand the people come first. When I get called, I don't say no. It's always because God is with me to help this family. And so that's where my life has turned. Where I was before, I was an accountant. I got my degree in accounting, and my whole world was numbers and you know, and being in front of the computer, and you know, bivocational in that way, going, you know, leading the church, going to work. And it came to the point where I was trying to decide how can I keep doing this? It's like having 4 jobs. I had 2 jobs during COVID, 2 different jobs plus the 2 churches. That was 4 jobs altogether I was doing during that time. I was so busy, and to this day still busy. But yeah, just that was my path. It was just opened up for me. That's all I can say about that, is just the decision in my mind was made, and then the path just opened up. It's just like everything in my life since then has been a blessing. So I can't talk enough about that, being ordained.
Thanks, Roxanne.
Yes.
Bernadine, do you have a story?
Let me think. I'm so overwhelmed listening to all these wonderful stories of my wonderful friends, and I was so thrilled when Alan asked me if I'd be a part of this panel, because actually the Philadelphia 11 had a huge impact on my life, and in fact it quite drastically changed the course of my life. Because, you know, I'm always intrigued with stories of call, you know, people being called, and I love to hear them, and they're usually so dramatic and so moving, and I never ever had a call. I never had a call story. I just, from the time I was a tiny little girl, knew I was going to be a priest. I just knew it. And I didn't even quite know what that meant. And these were the days when I couldn't even be an acolyte.
Right.
And I used to get really kind of upset, because I'd be like, these rowdy boys that can't keep their mouths shut, and they sit there and play with their tassels, and they pout their gum, and they get to carry the cross and I don't. And they're like, but dear, you get to be on the Junior Altar Guild. Stuff. And I couldn't understand, you know, how come they get to do that and I don't? I couldn't figure it out, but I always knew I wanted to be a priest. But then as I got older, reality sunk in, and I'm like, but I can't. I couldn't even be on the vestry, you know, the vestry we're all met. And so the Philadelphia 11 came along right when I was in college. And I so badly wanted the ordination of women to be legal, because I was, surprise, surprise, kind of a good little girl and a rule follower, and I did things right. And I can remember my parents, who were extremely encouraging about anything you want to do. Anything you want to do, don't you ever let it hold you back. My mother was probably the biggest feminist of her time I've ever known. Graduated from college at a time when women didn't, had, oh my God, not only a job, but a job that required her to drive solo all the way around the state of Wyoming. She was a field representative for what was called state welfare at that time. She was 30 years old before she ever got married. And she was just this radical feminist and instilled that in me. And guess what? This radical feminist in every aspect of life was opposed to the ordination of women. Because she was a cradle Episcopalian. And Episcopalians, well, we just don't do that. And I would say, and I can remember the first General Convention when the ordination of women was turned down, was voted down. And I can remember, I'll never forget it. There was this cartoon in the newspaper, and it was this old, crotchety old guy kneeling at his bed, and it has, the newspaper headlines are across the bed, and it said, Episcopal Church denies ordination of women. And he's praying, and there's a little sampler up on the wall, and the sampler says, God is a gentleman through and through, and in all probability, Episcopal too. Roger, the old guy, is praying, and he says, and I'm pleased to report, Father, your will is being done on earth. And I was just heartbroken because I wanted to be a priest. I wanted to go to seminary, and I was in college. This was right about the time when I could have. And I can remember asking my mother, the feminist, how come you're opposed to this? Well, it's just not done. It's just not done. Kind of like you never turned around behind you to see who was sitting behind you in church. I always thought it was probably a good idea to know who was sitting behind you, but evidently not. And I said, but what if I wanted to be a priest? And she said, oh, well, you'd be wonderful. I can't see anybody I think would be a better priest. And I'm like, but look, I can't. And she goes, oh, you'd never do a thing like that anyway. You know, you're a rule follower. You stay by the rules. You wouldn't do that. And I'm like, but I want to. And that was the mindset at that time. Even very liberal, forward-thinking people would not do this. So my time passed because I graduated from college and I couldn't go to seminary, and I wanted to with all my heart, and I couldn't. I didn't get to have that process. So I go to grad school, I end up with a PhD in psychology, and I'm loving my life. I'm loving it. I ended up working for many years. I'm still actually working as a practicing psychotherapist. Business has really picked up lately, I might add. And I'm still adjunct faculty in psychology. I'm the director of Sweetwater BOCES, which is Board of Cooperative Educational Services. And I have loved that life. I have loved it. But way back, I was still like, but I wanted to be a priest. And then I read this great little quote that Bobby found about, I think it's in the documentary, I think it's a statement out of the Philadelphia 11 that says, women can be president, but never an ordained minister. So I thought, well, okay, I'll be a politician. So in addition to all my psychology and BOCES stuff, I also spent, I always say 10 years in the big house. So I was in the state legislature. I was, just as an aside, the only female senator at the time. So the Wyoming State Senate at that time was Bernie and the boys. So I had a lot of experience of being kind of the only woman in the room and the only female voice in the room. And I discovered it was a wonderful place because they did listen to me and my voice did change things and it did change the trajectory of things. But there was still, so I was doing all these other things. I had 2 full-time jobs. And I was still, there was still something really missing. And then we didn't have that beautiful Iona program just yet. Our bishop at the time called me and said, Bernie, such a deal as I got for you. They've got this program at ILF, which is a non-denominational seminary in Denver, called the Journey Program. And it's mostly online, but you go down in the summer and you spend summer on campus and some long weekends, but otherwise you're online. I think you ought to do it. And I'm like, yes, I'm going to do it. So I'm going to seminary when I'm in the Senate, working full time, and I have a psychotherapy practice. And I kept thinking, what if I could have gone when I was 22 years old? What if I could have gone when I really wanted to? When it could have been all, and I could have been a full-time seminary student, and I loved seminary, I loved everything about it. And I was scared to death when I went down there, because by now, as you probably guessed, I'm a little long in the tooth. You know, I'm thinking, it's been a long time since I've done graduate level work. I've killed a really lot of brain cells over all those years. I'm too stupid to go to seminary. I'll never make it. I'm going to be the oldest one there. I'm going to be everybody's grandmother. Interestingly, I got down there. I wasn't even close to the oldest. In fact, I was one of the younger ones, because that's what everybody was doing. They were doing it kind of, who said, do second career because you don't make any money. So far, the amount of money I've made as a priest is like 0. But that's what they were doing. They were all going to seminary afterwards when they could. And I can't tell you how many discussions I had with women who said, this has been my dream since I was 22 years old. And I'm like, wow, me too, me too. And I never got to do it. And they're like, we didn't either. And my best friend down there said, I went to law school to please my father. I became a corporate lawyer to please my husband. And now I'm pleasing myself. And there was that great liberation and wonderful feeling of doing that. And then I was lucky enough to come and be part of the Iona program. And I can't say enough good things about that, and it's already been talked about. And so it just felt as if my life had come full circle. And I ended up being ordained in 2014 back at the Episcopal Church of the Holy Communion in Rock Springs, the very church where I was baptized, and the very church where I said at age 5, I'm going to be the priest. This is my church.
And God's time is not ever our time.
Yeah, really.
And God finally said in 2014, okay,
You can do this.
yeah, you fought the good fight. You run with the bulls and fought with the dogs and swum with the sharks. I guess we'll let you do it. And it has been the greatest blessing of my life. I still have 3 jobs, incidentally, but it's okay. It's okay, because this has been my passion from the time I was a child. And the Philadelphia 11 inspired me so, because I think it was the first time I ever learned that sometimes you gotta break the rules. And sometimes you gotta make good trouble. And by golly, those women made good trouble, and praise God they did, because it's changed my life.
Another encore career story is Katharine.
All right. These women were ordained in the summer of 1974, right. I graduated from college that spring. I had work to do all summer, and then I went to do graduate school at Oregon State in oceanography, and that was my path. And I stayed and got a PhD in oceanography, biological oceanography. I worked on squids and octopuses. Fascinating creatures. And I came to the end of my graduate work, and I had 2 postdocs, and then there weren't any more positions, and I wrote to different institutions that might welcome my expertise. And I kept getting letters saying, well, there are 150 applicants for this position, sorry. And it quickly became clear that there was no way to continue. I didn't have a place, I didn't have funding, it was done. And while I'd been in Oregon, I had joined the Episcopal Church in the local community where Oregon State is. And people in that, I did things in the congregation. I was the junior warden for a while and the senior warden for a while. And then people began to ask me if I'd ever thought about being a priest. I said, not me, not me. I took a year of Greek at the university because I'd wanted to do that since I was a kid. And I took some courses from Marcus Borg, some of you will remember him. And he later asked me to help teach with him and to teach classes for him, which was pretty surprising to me. And I started to be working in the diocese, particularly around education. How can we more helpfully provide adequate programming for lay people in the Episcopal Church? We all should be well educated, not just the clergy. People kept asking me if I'd ever thought about being a priest, and I said, no, it's not for me. It's just not, no way. Then in 1991, early 1991, there was a big action, military action in the Middle East, and some of you will remember that. I was asked to preach, which I had not done, at that congregation in the midst of that, because the clergy were to be away at the local convention, the diocesan convention. That experience changed my mind. And I went and talked to the bishop and the assistant to the bishop, who was later the bishop in another place. And I was in seminary the next fall. I don't know how or why, but it happened. It happened. And I went for the first year to a Roman Catholic Benedictine seminary in Oregon called Mount Angel, which has a monastery as well as a seminary. Most of the guys there thought I was from Mars, because the only other person there studying for ordination was a Lutheran man. There were a couple of young women who were studying to be directors of Christian education. But they let me stay for a year, and I got a great start. And then my husband and our daughter moved down to California, and I went to CDSP, the Church Divinity School of the Pacific at Berkeley, for 2 years. It was a surprise, but it fit. I went back to Oregon. There were no full-time positions, at least for women, in 1994. The local congregation's rector said finally to me, we would like to have you half-time as an assistant. And I did that for 5 years. As the assistant in the congregation, I helped to start a Spanish language service there. Remarkable ministry. You know, I learned amazing things from doing that work. And I kept teaching at the university, and I was still active in diocesan education things. 5 years on, I got some sabbatical time. And I wanted to learn more about what was being called then total ministry, mutual ministry. And I pinged a number of congregations in different states, different dioceses in the West, and kind of planned a trip across a dozen or so congregations in January, February. Of course. It was great. It was great. And I came to Wyoming, and I went to visit Bruce Caldwell, who was the bishop then, and we had a great conversation because I wanted to learn more, and he sent me off to Wheatland to talk to Roy Walrath about what he was doing. It was very, very helpful to go to all these congregations and learn how they were doing things. I went to a congregation in Nevada, in Reno, and the woman priest there, the rector, after I interviewed the congregation, she said to me, "What you've done here is a lot like what a bishop does when a bishop visits. I want to put your name in for the next election." That's totally crazy. I'm too young, I'm a woman, I haven't been a priest long enough. Ridiculous. And I left there and drove across Utah in the snow, and kept going to Wyoming and the other places. And on the way home, it just sort of went, I think I'm supposed to say yes to that. I don't know why, but I think I'm meant to participate in that process. I think the rector was appalled when I got home and told him that finally, but he was helpful and supportive. I was elected as the Bishop of Nevada. Totally crazy, but they were doing the same kind of work and they wanted more encouragement, I think. I was there for almost 6 years, and in the latter couple of years, my bishop colleagues were bugging me to let my name go in for the presiding bishop. And again, I said, that's totally crazy. I'm a woman. I've been a bishop of a small diocese. It's enormous, but it's small in numbers. That's just insane. They kept pushing. And so I said, okay, I've heard this before. I'm supposed to do this. I got elected. I don't understand why or how. But the season in which I was elected was about truth and honesty and being clear about who you are and how the church is supposed to function. There was a lot of dysfunction, and it ended up in people leaving the Episcopal Church because women were ordained, and because we were welcoming LGBT people. It was a very challenging time of the world. And at the same time, anytime somebody new comes along, there's a possibility. Learning to say yes when you're shivering in your boots makes life different. God calls us and God equips us, and I think that's the basis of what we're about.
Thank you. Powerful stories, right? All of us as women in the Episcopal Church have probably had some pushback to our gender as people who wear a collar. I know if I wear my collar in a public place, if I'm going through an airport, or if I'm just somewhere where people see me and say, "Oh, you're certainly not a Catholic priest because you look like a woman," and I say, and so then to explain, yes, but the Episcopal Church does ordain women, but what do we call you? That's one of the biggest challenges in the Episcopal Church is that I for a number of years in my church was called Father Bobby because there were people in my church who I said, you can call me anything, but don't call me mother. and so you were Mother, Marilyn, weren't you?
Not if I could help it.
Yeah.
No, I mean, people did question that. Sometimes they tried to call me sister, sometimes they called me pastor. But I generally said, if we can call each other by our first names, the names that we're baptized, and I want to be able to call you, not call you Mrs. Smith, I would like to just be able to call you Mary, then you call me Marilyn, and we'll be having a kind of equality where I'm not here as the priest, mother, I am just one of you, but I have a different role. So for me, that worked most of the time. When I came to the cathedral clergy have different titles. It's dean if you're the named dude there. And probably 99% of the people called me by my first name. And there were some, and especially people who had children, who then they would be more likely to call me Dean Marilyn. But that was pretty unusual.
Yeah, you can be a dean, you can be a bishop, but we are priests, but we don't say priest Melinda typically. So yes, call us higher names. Theologically or scripturally, evangelicals will often argue that women biblically are prohibited from serving as in a role where they are pastoring men. It's okay to teach Sunday school and confirmation classes even, but we're not, the Bible says. How do you respond to that, Marilyn?
Well, there are several passages that people oftentimes will throw out. First of all, they look at Titus 2:7, and that passage addresses both men and women, and it admonishes both groups to exercise self-control, to stay above reproach. And the older, more experienced people need wisdom and discernment, and to be discreet and master their wills, their tongues, and their passions. And that they are to teach new Christians by words and examples, so that older women teach younger women how to be good wives and mothers, and older men set a good example for younger men. I think another key passage that has been the one that's come to me as the greatest pushback is from 1 Timothy 2, where it says, "A woman should learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man. She must be silent." Well, when you look at that silent, it is not like silent, like don't say anything. It's a word that means be quiet, to have a sort of holiness about it, to learn with a kind of reverence and composure. And in that time, this was in Ephesus that he was writing, there are all these new Christians, and they are excited, and they have freedom. And before, women couldn't get to learn anything. They were just, maybe you got some little education from your husband at home. But now, there is this new freedom in Christ. You get to be a learner too. But if you're going to be a learner, do it with a kind of calmness about you so that you can learn, and don't get so excited that you're going to turn off the other people all around you. And I think that's what these women were kind of going a little overboard. And it wasn't that women couldn't teach. Paul wasn't being that misogynistic. He was just saying, you have to do it within the context of where you are. Don't flaunt your freedom. And then we look in other places, especially in Acts. Paul didn't forbid women from teaching at all. He commends Priscilla, who taught Apollos, who was the great preacher. He mentions other women who had great leadership roles. Phoebe in Romans, Mary, Tryphena, Tryphosa, Euodia, and Sanctity in Philippians. I mean, he picks out these people and says, they are apostles. These are the people who have apostolic ministries. They are doing the work that should be done. So I push back, and I'll tell you how. I look at Galatians. And for the verse in Galatians 3, there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And that just makes everything equal. We all have a place in this. We don't have to all be the same. We don't have to be that kind of uniformity, but we have unity. And then for me personally, go to 2 Corinthians 5:17. So if anyone is in Christ, there is a new creation. Everything old has passed away. See, everything has become new. All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and has given us the ministry of reconciliation. And so I have the sense that God is always making things new. There's the old way we do things, and then God says, oh, we're going to do something new. that's a new creation that keeps coming and happening. And that's where I take great heart to say, yeah, this worked okay then, something new is happening right now, or for us in, you know, in 74, the new thing is God is in, we've got some new things for women to do, enroll in the church as clergy and priests. And I think that gives us a way then to involve young people. It's given us the avenues to say, yeah, there is a place for gays and lesbians and trans people. There's a place in the church for everybody because God is doing something new in our time. And we get to be a part of that. It's part of the, get to have that image of God and being a creator, being a part of that.
One of the most beautiful things about the Anglican tradition is our three-legged stool of scripture, reason, and tradition. That we don't just look at that Bible statically that was written in the context of first century Jerusalem, the New Testament, and when Paul was having these conversations, it's that the world evolves, and that we have to look at the reality of what's important in our tradition. And for a long time, our tradition said men, white men, straight white men. And then we eventually have come to this point of saying the world has changed contextually. And reason, our brain, we get to use our brains in the Episcopal Church. That's it's a beautiful thing. And yet we're still anchored in those biblical scriptures. Any other thoughts on that? On that part of it?
Well, first, I really want to thank Marilyn for sharing those Bible verses, because that meant a lot to me, to hear that, and to hear that when we take things just in literal, these are the words, we mess up. It's when we look at the bigger, broader picture that we actually see exactly what God is saying. And thank God we do have that scripture, tradition, and reason. I remember a number of years ago when the Episcopal Church ran a bunch of just little 15-second blurby commercials. Do you remember that? They were wonderful. Like one was just a big picture of a Bible, and it said, "The Episcopal Church, will you come if we don't throw the book at you?" And another one was just an old-fashioned hat rack with a hat hanging on it. And it said, "The Episcopal Church, where you check your hat at your door and not your brain." And I've always loved that we've been able to think and we've been able to reason. And I loved Marilyn sharing the Bible verses that ground her when she gets pushback. And I get pushback a lot. But just really recently, we were talking about this story about, we did a blessing of the animals. And we did a big, and one of our online newspapers, news sources did a big article about it. And it was beautiful and lovely, and said, now I think I know what Noah's Ark sounded like. Because, I mean, we had chickens and everything else in there. And then it talked about me blessing the animals. And somebody responded, because on online news you can do that, and wrote this big long thing, first of all about the heresy of blessing animals because they're just things, and you know it would be like blessing the table, and I'm like, well, I've blessed a table or two. And how animals had no value. Gracie, my cat, took great exception to that. But so after they got done beating upon all the animals, they said, and then there's the Reverend. And off they went on all the reasons why it was a heresy for me as a female to be a priest. And I was, of course, going to kill him. I was going to get all theological too, and I had all my Bible scriptures. And one of my friends said, don't respond. Don't say a word. Let everybody else do it for you. And they did. I mean, claws out. The people that weren't after him about the animals were after him about the women. And I think the guy still has claw marks around. So I'm happy about that. But you know where I fall back every single time? I fall back to scripture. But you know where else I fall? My baptismal covenant. That's where I fall. That I have taken a pledge to do the very best I can to be that person, and the one that sticks in my head And I actually used it in legislative testimony when we were fighting some very vicious discrimination laws. And I said, I just have to uphold my faith. And my faith says, respect the worth and dignity of every human being. Period. Drop the mic. End of the story.
Follow Jesus.
Yeah.
When have you had the greatest pushback or a similar moment of, like Bernie has just described, Melinda, as a black woman? To state the obvious.
Besides my moment during my discernment process.
Yeah, besides
that was a good one.
once you're actually in
But once I
the
was
room.
actually ordained.
In Wyoming, by the way.
Yes, exactly. In the equality state.
Yes, the equality state.
You know, and usually it's not, you know, a big dramatic something. It can be just little snippy comments. I had now former parishioner about 2-3 years ago, but we ran into each other in the parking lot, and he said, well, you're probably wondering why I haven't been in church for a while. And I said, well, yes. I said, but, you know, I don't do the attendance thing, so, you know, I'm not going to call you up and go, so where were you on Sunday morning? And he said, well, you know, and I've just decided that, you know, my wife and I have decided that, you know, this just really isn't going to work for us because, and, you know, to be honest, that, well, and it was not in the context of women clergy, but it was, you know, black clergy should not be in charge of white congregations, and white clergy should not be in charge of black congregations, because everybody should be sticking to their own kind. And I thought, I don't think I want to ask you how you feel about women at this point. I'm going to let that one go. But it's usually something, you know, it's usually not that dramatic, but it's usually something of, you know, somebody bringing up, so do you believe in the Bible? And was like, well, yes. Not as my Lord and Savior, however, but yeah, okay. And then asking about the purported, you know, biblical sources for women being silent and walking 3 steps behind. And generally my response is, you know, first of all, Paul says a whole lot of things, a lot of which are contradictory because he's speaking to specific churches at specific moments. I said, but you know what? My take is Jesus trumps everybody. And Jesus, the one time he does discriminate, which is with the Syrophoenician woman, she backs him up, you know, and it's like, whoa, you're right, let's just get this on track. So Jesus is pretty clear that we are not supposed to judge. We are supposed to be listening for where God is speaking to us, not judging who we think should or should not be listening to God's call. And that's how it works. Jesus trumps everybody. And what harm is there in being obedient to that call of Jesus? To treat everybody with respect, to invite everybody to be a part of the body, and not making these distinctions of you get to be here, and you get to be here, and you get to be here, and you don't get to be over here. Jesus never does that. So that's generally my response, is that, you know, if you want to play God, you can, but Jesus is pretty clear about that not being what it means to be a disciple or an apostle.
I think it has to a lot with people have a lack of experience. I remember one time going to a church. I was just doing a supply thing, and I went in, I did the service, and went to the coffee hour afterward, and this little old lady came up and sat down beside me, and she says, well, I want you to know, if I'd known you were going to be here to be the priest, I wasn't going to come to church. But then I went ahead and I came, and I found out it was you, And now I can't understand what the big problem was. You did everything just right. And you know, she would, whenever I went back to supply at that church, she'd show up and we had a great relationship. But I've had other clergy say to me how they were opposed to the ordination of women. I went to a seminary where over half the faculty were opposed to the ordination of women, and a lot of the male students were too. So that gave me an edge, maybe edgy probably. But you know, kind of one of my concerns was, and I heard this early on, it was kind of a fear that if I didn't do well as a woman at the church, that then they would not ever call another woman to be a priest. And I thought, men go into a congregation and no one's ever going to say, well, they just were a screw up, we'll never have another man. But they felt sure enough to say that or convey that kind of perception. And that was, I think, one of the more difficult things that kind of eats at you to think, God, I've got to do everything perfect. Well, we don't do everything perfect. We just do the best we can. And I think generally it all turns out okay.
Katharine, you were talking when we were having lunch today about the visceral reaction to these women who were ordained. Would you just talk about those feelings and the gap between their ordination and then the first communion, which was November?
Some people responded violently, kind of like little children. When they provided communion at the rail, some of those women's hands were bitten, scratched, people thrown the elements back at the priests. It's mind-boggling. But the fear, I think, is what charges that. People are afraid of change. They're not happy about it, and they're not thinking about what they're doing. It's not unlike a baby refusing to eat what's being given. I'm not going to have this. I don't like it. I don't like it. It's visceral, and it's not. It's not polite. It's not holy. It's not good. But people respond in ways that are pretty stark when they meet something new and surprising. I don't think that went on for very long, but it was very direct. Yeah, very direct. And I am aware of some reconciliation later on when people apologized. So it's horrible, and at the same time, there is a way to heal this.
Yeah. I remember I was 10 years old when the Philadelphia 11 were ordained, and I can remember our family, because we talked about everything, talking about it, and my mother and I were just adamant that this was a terrible thing. And my mother, because she did not think, she was a lot like your mother, she didn't think women should be priests, because it's just not right. But for me, it was more, you're supposed to, if you're going to do this, you're supposed to follow the rules, and they broke the rules, so this is not how it's supposed to happen. And over time, my father we would have conversations about it as it continued in the news. And my dad spoke to how his comparison was to the civil rights movement and nonviolent protest and going places where you're not supposed to go and doing the things you're not supposed to be doing while you're there. And how that's sometimes how change happens. And so is it that they're wrong for They clearly all felt called to this, because otherwise, why would you ever go through all this agony? So if they're truly called by God to be priests, and what we're saying is, we know God would never do that, but when have we ever known the mind of God, right? So God will call anybody to do what God has for them to do. So if we will allow that, God always surprises us with the things God will do. And we can't say breaking the rules is by definition doing the wrong thing. Sometimes breaking the rules is doing the right thing, and it's how we make change happen. Then can you see the comparison between these two situations and how they're parallel? And he was probably the most important voice that I heard that made me reconsider, not just, I felt like the ordination of women was right, and 2 years later when it was actually officially done, yay. But talking to him helped convince me that they needed to be included in that, even though they had broken the rules, because they were doing what God called them to do. So to have it, and I can't remember what they called it, but they did actually end up having some kind of acknowledgement of the validity of their ordinations. And so that, for me, was always kind of, if you're familiar with Myers-Briggs, I'm like an off-the-scale J. So it's like, we're going to make a decision now. Yeah, we're going to make a decision now. If it's right or wrong, doesn't matter. If it's wrong, we'll have time to fix it, maybe. But so for me to be able to kind of find space for thinking about things and connections and ramifications, that was really important for me to be something that I could apply down the road of, okay, so here I've made this mistake in the past on something that was really important. So I need to be careful when I do those same, leap off the end of the diving board without looking to see if there's water. And make sure I don't do that I look at when I'm making decisions, and when I'm expressing opinions, talking about thinking ahead of time about where the ripples go, and what are those ramifications in terms of ultimately where we need to be, and what we need to be doing, and how we can be Christ walking in the world, shedding the light of God in the community, whether it's against the rules or not.
Roxanne, you mentioned that you were the first Native American woman ordained on the reservation. In a community or a set of communities that are very traditional in their culture, and like you said, not everyone's a Christian on the reservation. How has that provided certain specific challenges to you as you seek to find your way in that world where you serve two different tribes with two different, frankly, perspectives of what a woman's role is in that tribe? How does that all work?
Being a bridge, I think, is the best way I could describe being both, trying to help people on the reservation with the state and, with the diocese. Being that bridge between them, because there was a lot of misunderstanding going on before I even became a priest. There was all of these things that the congregation would bring up in the history of not being able to get along, with people in the diocese. And I didn't see it myself. I was 9 when women were able to become ordained, and they paved the way for me, for all of us. But the level that I came from was because my grandparents were very traditional in their ways of spiritualism, in the way that they wanted to, in their language, they would say their prayers, and then you would hear Jesus Christ in the middle of that language, and then they would continue their prayers. And so I always knew that we're all praying to the same God, but we're just doing things differently, and how it feels to us and as people, Native people. And then when I married my husband, Aaron, and got to learn their traditions and their cultures, and they are different how they do things. Got to understand more about the Arapaho tribe, and also being Shoshone and him Arapaho, we're also another bridge with the tribes, and well respected to this day. Because we do whatever we do for the people and the kids, and we're out there trying to do all these things. But the challenges for me were, how are the men in the tribe going to take me? Because women don't take on these kind of roles as being like like I would be considered like a healer in the tribe. But women can't do that in the tribe. And so for my brother-in-law who became ordained, they did the ceremony for him because he's like one of them, like a leader. And so they gave him this a celebration of kind of like you join the traditional healers. But when I became ordained, there was really nothing. And so I was like, well, that's just because of the way that the mindset is women are supposed to be down here, and men are up here. And so I come from a tribe in the Seneca Nation in the East. My dad is Seneca, my mom is Shoshone. But growing up in New York, women were the ones who were the leaders. They were the ones who made the decisions. The men were just the speakers, and they relayed what the women decided, that kind of stuff, And so I was brought up kind of, women are going, what is your idea, Roxanne, as a 9-year-old, or 8-year-old? I would tell them what I thought, This is how we're going to do things. And just kind of had that mindset, I was always going to be a leader somewhere. And coming to Wyoming and then, having to go through this with the men in the tribe, where I was told, you can't go hunting. Aaron was trying to take me hunting. My grandpa said, you can't go hunting because women bring bad luck when they go hunting with the men. And I just thanked him for telling me that. And then we went out, I put my stuff on and I went hunting, And that's just the way it always has been with me. And then, some of the traditions, the women are supposed to walk 5 paces behind the men. And I refused to do that because it's just like I can't do that. Because I think my upbringing was mainly with the Seneca women, and and then to come out here and then to just kind of force myself to be that leader. No matter what job I had with the tribal government, I started at the bottom, worked my way to the top. And so I knew a lot of people I worked with. They were so surprised when I became ordained as a priest and it was announced. They were so surprised because it was like, we never thought you would ever, go this direction. I said, I always knew I was a priest. I always knew. I just had to tell myself that and become that person. And today, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. It's exactly, I feel like I'm fulfilled. My life is fulfilled because of the direction that I took to become this person. But it wasn't because, I saw all the women, and we were just talking, me and Catherine, about the women early on in the church that I remember were so dedicated to like our Father's house. And in fact, one of them came from Lander, Joel Hart. And she would have to climb in the window at our Father's house to get in because somebody would lock her out. She just was like this frail woman that would, do whatever it took. And then there was Anne Fontaine, I believe she was probably one of the first ones. And so she was so beloved by our communities. They're the ones who led the way for me. Yeah, so they're the ones who came in first. And then I was more accepted as I came in the door, and just taking on what it is that we are supposed to do. Because I tell people this all the time, women are the heart of the family. And they're the heart of hearts, the heart of the community, and that's how I kind of came in the door, was like, this is who I am. This is what I bring, is just talk about love. Let's talk about these things that Jesus was trying to teach the people back then. It's just a different time, you know. And I'm a disciple. I'm one of the disciples that has been called, and you know. So that's what I project to the men in the tribe. It's just, you know, this is who I am, and this is where I'm going, and so it just have to accept me, and they have. I'm, you know, with everybody, it's just been, I thought my road was going to be really tough. I was prepared, but it was not like that for me. Everyone accepted me for who I was and who I became, you know. So.
Lightning round. Marilyn has to leave here soon, but lightning round, and then we'll open it up for some questions. Greatest moment of joy in your journey of ordained ministry, Marilyn?
Well, I'd say two. One was after my first year in seminary, and I had enough money to go to seminary. When I came back, I had used all my savings, and there were a group of people here who said, well, we want you to stay in seminary, and so we'll be sending you money. And little lady sent me $5, some $20. I get a bundle of checks every month. And when I left seminary, I didn't have any debt. I'd been able to buy a computer and take a trip to Jerusalem. And they were just so supportive, and that was a real great joy. The other happened when we took our general ordination exams, and my best friend, Michael, said, let's make this fun. We'll play Trivial Pursuit. And we got a group of people, and we would bring in our questions, and we would play Trivial Pursuit once a week with our questions. And some of our classmates said, you cannot be preparing for these serious exams in this playful way. You'll never do well. Well, Michael and one other guy and I passed all 7 parts, and nobody else did. So that was a great joy. And the other, I think, was actually being ordained as a deacon at the cathedral, because that was been the congregation that had sponsored me, and that the church was packed with lots of people, both from the university and Laramie and the cathedral and from around the diocese. And that was a great joy to say, okay, we've done all that work, and now it's all been sort of confirmed that you've done the right thing, you're on the right path. It's not going to necessarily be easier, but this is a time of really experiencing the joy of getting to do ordained ministry. And it has been most all the time a real joy. And I'm really sorry I have to leave,
okay.
but I
Thanks.
have
Thank
this
you,
other
Meryl.
committee.
Thank
And
you for
I
being
thank
able to be
you
here.
for listening to all of this blather from me.
Melinda?
Okay, so I've got a facetious one and one not facetious one. So the facetious one is when I was in seminary, well, actually when I was going to seminary, we had just gotten a new dean at the cathedral who was not Marilyn. And so he was I mentioned to him about my EFM group telling me that I should go to ordained ministry, and I finally decided, and what did he think? And he said, well, you won't be able to dress the way you do, and you won't be able to wear high heels anymore, and he had this whole list of things that I had to stop doing if I were going to be ordained. And so that was actually the real reason why I went to Medicine Bow instead as my sponsoring church, because he made me so angry, and never regretted it. But so when I was ordained a deacon in the cathedral, I wore my 3-inch spike heels. Snapped those babies all the way down the aisle. And it was like, so there, do your worst.
All right.
So that was a moment of great joy, because, you know, revenge is sweet. But probably my greatest joyful moment was being able to celebrate communion for the first time in the church where I'd been baptized, which was St. Thomas in Du Bois, with so many of the people that I had known growing up that were still there. And just, it was like coming full circle. I was baptized when I was 5 because my parents didn't believe in infant baptism, so we had to ask to be baptized. And so I had asked to be baptized, and so I had those two things as these great moments in my life, centered at St. Thomas, and centered on my, going where God was asking me to go. And so that's probably, yeah, my greatest joy was being able to celebrate at the altar there.
And
That first time.
I'm the moderator, but I have a similar story, just I want to share. I grew up in the church in Riverton, St. James Riverton, and I had the same, why can't I carry the cross as an acolyte? I don't understand this stupid rule that it's only for boys. And to go back to that church as a guest priest and preacher and be able to celebrate and preach at this church where I had grown up was a moment of great joy, as was that moment when John Smiley laid his, and all of my brethren and sisterin gathered around. That feeling, there is nothing like that feeling of the Holy Spirit on your head and on your shoulders and in that room. So yeah. Okay.
Snowstorms to do that.
Oh, yes. Driving through snowstorms, as many of you did. Yes. Catherine.
Sure. As presiding bishop, one of my jobs was to go to something called the primates meeting. The top bishops in each of the parts of the Anglican communion, and there were 40 or so of them. And the meeting was somewhere in Africa. I decided when I went that I was going to have a conversation with every single one of those men, even if they didn't want to have a conversation with me. I managed to do that. They were not all deep conversations. Probably the lightest one was having one of the Nigerians tell me about his costume. But we had a decent, appropriate conversation with everybody. And they, amazingly, none of them escaped.
Right.
Which, I counted as success.
Yes,
Perfect.
definitely.
Bernadine.
Oh, yeah. I had two moments of great joy, and they were linked. The first one was, of course, the night of my ordination, simply because it was in my home church at Holy Communion, where I had been baptized, confirmed, married, and where I had, from the very beginning as a little girl, wanted to be a priest. And just that moment of, in that church that was packed, surrounded by people I love and who loved me, knowing that after all those years, because it took so many years, to have the culmination of that evening. And 3 different people came up to me afterwards, and 3 very down-to-earth, very rational, not even remotely fanciful people at all, came up to me afterwards and said, "Your father was here tonight." My father, who had been, I was ordained on the anniversary of my father's death, and it meant everything to me, because it was, I thought, his resurrection day, and I thought it was my day of great joy, and to have people out of the blue say, "I saw your father," that meant everything. And then the next day, celebrating communion. And Roxanne spoke of Anne Fontaine. Anne was my mentor. So Anne stood with me to celebrate communion. Judy LaCourts, who was a deacon from Rock Springs, was my deacon. The acolytes were all women. The readers were women, the musicians were women. And John Smiley was the bishop, and he said, "I think I'm just going to go sit in the congregation for this." But somehow that celebrating communion in the church that had supported me for all those years, surrounded by sisters, was, with my ordination, the greatest joy. Not just ordained ministry, but probably my life.
Roxanne?
Yes.
And all the stories are similar. I felt the same way when I became ordained. It was one of the greatest days of my life. I had my niece in the audience. My family was there, and when John Smiley walked by, and he had everything on, you know, his stuff, everything. She said pretty loudly to where everybody could hear, "Is he the king?"
He thought so.
We heard that when he walked by and told me that later, but everybody was telling me about it later, that how cute that was for her to, you know, she's so tiny and looking, you know, way up at him. But yeah, the having all the hands on you and you just feel something happening to you during that time, and it's hard to, I know that people probably don't believe you when you say there was some electricity that kind of happened there too. And that's real happening to you. And from that point on, it's different, just a different world for you. And so those were some of the joys I could think of that were, you know, that meant a lot to me.
Does anyone here have any questions? We've got a few minutes. If anyone has any questions of any of us or any of, or each other, for that matter.
You said you were brought up in the Seneca tribe, so that's in New York?
That's in New York.
And it's near Seneca Falls?
It's 50 miles south of Buffalo.
I've been to the Suffragette National Historic thing in Seneca. I wondered if that had any influence at all on your development as a young girl that said, no one's gonna
My
tell me
grandfather.
what I can't do.
My grandfather and my grandmother were part of the Thomas Industrial School. And that was part of the, you know, where they did get their hair cut. They went through the whole thing with the residential schools. And so he came out in his life at the age of 33, he was saved. He went into the Army and was in the armed services for a while, and then he became saved during that time and just went right into the ministry. So by the time I'm born, he's already a minister. And so my whole time growing up out there was really fond memories of his church that he built. And so that's where my foundation kind of came in. And like I said, I moved to Wyoming, and just a total different, it was a culture shock, you know, because of even the geographical part of it. There's all these trees and, you know, all these, you know, foliage and everything. Then you go to Wyoming, is the first thing I said was, there's no place to play hide and seek out here.
Anything else? Any parting thoughts?
You didn't share your joy.
Yes, I did. My church in Riverton, yeah. Those were my joyful times too.
Can I just add one more thing I thought of, was when Anne Fontaine was in her last days. I received the package from her, and in the package was a beaded stole, and it was a white beaded stole, had roses beaded on it right here, and then she told me that the ladies, and she couldn't remember who it was that had beaded it for her, but the design, I could tell who did it. And so I knew who beaded it, and she was gone now. But we all know our designs. If you're an artist on the reservation, oh, that looks like Phoebe's, or something like that. And I knew who did that, but she said in her letter, I wanted to make sure that this, and that was to me a big joy.
Ellen.
So one quick question. So we're coming together today to celebrate the 50th anniversary of a huge barrier coming down. A barrier of like people embodying God's love through the priesthood. What barriers are still left in the church? What would be the next moment in your mind?
No more, I'm in charge. It's gotta be collaborative, it's gotta be community.
That is probably the next evolution will be truly, we are all ministry of the baptized, which is all of us. They are ordained. My ministry is as an ordained priest, but your ministry is just as critical to the growth and development of the church. And obviously, we're the next big thing after ordination of women has been the ordination, the open ordination of gay priests and allowing marriages in the church. And before it was legal, and again, let's not go there. Anyway, but to be the church that has taken the trajectory road of being that big tent church that is in our minute, that truly it's important that we welcome everyone and that we mean what we say when we say that, and we do things that honor and protect those who are marginalized. And Bernadine mentioned her baptismal covenant. That's our marching orders. To love our neighbor as ourselves and to respect the dignity of every human being. And I think many of us have done I've done more funerals I've done more same-sex weddings than I have.
So almost 2 to 1.
Me too.
And would you talk a little bit about the broader context of gay rights within the Episcopal Church for those who might not know?
Okay. The Episcopal Church had its own challenges around receiving and welcoming people of all sorts of love objects, if you will. How we can care appropriately for people in marriages that aren't normally honored in this country. There are indigenous realities around same-sex partnerships, have been forever. Some cultures have celebrated people with different love objects, if you will. Love foci would be a better way of saying it. Human beings are created in vast diversity. And the problem is that we say that only some people are okay. And some kinds of relationships are okay. We believe that relationships are okay if you are honoring the other person as a child of God, that you pray and hope for your partner's well-being. That's the object. How we really do love one another. That's what we're called to do. Yes, some religious traditions find it inappropriate or abhorrent. In the Episcopal Church, we've taken a stand pretty clearly that all people are welcome here. And we will love you if you are here to the best of our ability. We're human beings.
And we've come a long way since Gene Robinson was.
Absolutely right.
That was a tough
Right.
time.
Yeah.
So the ongoing struggle is, and it's something that the Episcopal Church has made deliberate and conscious decisions to wrestle with, and that is reconciliation on all kinds of levels and between all kinds of people, so that we can all be reconciled as the body of Christ together. And that's, there's, in each time period, there seems to be a particular focus for reconciliation. But overall, we have not necessarily wrestled with the structures that shape us that make reconciliation necessary. And it's that the Episcopal Church, and I'm sure other churches and other organizations, but we're just talking about us right now, that the Episcopal Church is saying, it's time we look at how we are shaped, the way we are shaped, And the ways in which that's shaping does not help us in living as the body of Christ, does not help us in being disciples and being followers of Jesus. And where those structures do not help that, we need to change those structures. First of all, we need to acknowledge they exist. Then we need to fix them or remove them. And that's kind of our ongoing challenge as Christian people and as human beings in the world at all, is, you know, the message Jesus gives us about living together and loving one another as God has loved us and as Jesus has loved us. That's the ideal situation for survival on this planet. But we never go there. And so that's part of the challenge that Jesus offers us, is if you want to be the best humans you can be, and you want to maximize the benefits of God's creation for creation, live in that way. And so our job is to move away from perhaps our biological imperatives to form up in packs and then attack each other, and say who's in and who's out and who's the other and who's the people, and learn to actually do what Jesus tells us to do. And if we can do that, 99% of our issues with one another as humans and the conflicts we have will go away, because we will have in place a means of talking to each other and caring for each other. That means what we're going to do is take care of each other. And it's not going to matter what flavor of human you are.
Amen, sister.
Amen.